Chapter 8. From somewhere at the bottom of a passage, the smell of roasting coffee, real coffee, not Victory coffee, drifted out into the street. Winston paused involuntarily. For maybe 2 seconds, he was back in the half-forgotten world of his childhood. Then a door banged, cutting off the smell as abruptly as if it had been a sound. He had walked several kilometers over the pavement, and his varicose ulcer was throbbing. This was the second time in 3 weeks he had skipped an evening at the community center. It was a risky move since they carefully tracked attendance at the center. In theory, a party member had no free time and was never alone except in bed. When he wasn't working, eating, or sleeping, it was assumed he would participate in some communal activity. Doing anything that hinted at a preference for solitude, even going for a walk alone, was slightly dangerous. There was a word for it in newspeak, own life, which meant individualism and eccentricity. But that evening, when he came out of the ministry, the balmy April air tempted him. The sky was a warmer blue than he had seen that year. Suddenly, the long, noisy evening at the center, with its boring games, lectures, and forced camaraderie fueled by gin, felt unbearable. On a whim, he chose to turn away from the bus stop and wandered into the labyrinth of London, first south, then east, then north again, losing himself among unfamiliar streets, and not caring which way he went. "If there is hope," he had written in his diary, "it lies in the proles." Those words echoed in his mind, expressing both a mystical truth and a harsh absurdity. He found himself in the vague, brown slums north and east of what had once been St. Pancras Station. He walked up a cobbled street lined with little 2-story houses that had battered doorways leading straight onto the pavement. They resembled rathholes in a way. Puddles of dirty water dotted the cobbles. People swarmed in and out of dark doorways and narrow alleyways branching off on either side. There were girls in their prime, with crudely lipsticked mouths, boys chasing after them, heavy women showing what those girls would look like 10 years later, old bent figures shuffling along on splayed feet, and ragged barefooted children playing in the puddles, scattering at angry shouts from their mothers. About a quarter of the windows on the street were broken and boarded up. Most people ignored Winston. A few looked at him with a mix of guarded curiosity. 2 large women with brick-red forearms folded across their aprons were talking outside a doorway. As he approached, he caught snippets of their conversation. "Yes," one said, "that's all well and good, but if you'd been in my place, you'd have done what I did. It's easy to criticize, but you don't have the same problems I have." "Ah," the other replied, "that's just it. That's exactly where it is." Their loud voices stopped suddenly. The women stared at him warily as he passed by. But it wasn't exactly hostility. It was more like a momentary stiffening, as if an unfamiliar animal had just passed. The blue overalls of the party were likely not a common sight in a street like this. In fact, it was unwise to be seen in such places unless you had a clear reason. The patrols might stop you if you ran into them. "May I see your papers, comrade? What are you doing here? What time did you leave work? Is this your usual way home?" Not that there was a rule against taking an unusual route home, but it was enough to attract attention if the thought police learned about it. Suddenly the whole street erupted in chaos. People yelled warnings from all sides. They dove into their doorways like rabbits. A young woman jumped out of a doorway ahead of Winston, scooped up a tiny child playing in a puddle, wrapped her apron around it, and jumped back inside, all in one smooth motion. At that moment, a man in a concertina-like black suit, who had come out of a side alley, ran towards Winston, pointing excitedly to the sky. "Steamer," he shouted. "Look out, Governor. Bang overhead. Lay down quick." Steamer was a nickname the proles used for rocket bombs. Winston instinctively threw himself on the ground. The proles were usually right when they warned about this kind of thing. They seemed to have an instinct that alerted them a few seconds before a rocket arrived, even though the rockets supposedly traveled faster than sound. Winston clasped his forearms over his head. There was a roar that seemed to make the pavement shake, and small objects fell onto his back. When he stood up, he found himself covered in shards of glass from the nearest window. He walked on. The bomb had destroyed a group of houses 200 meters up the street. A black plume of smoke hung in the sky, and below it, A cloud of plaster dust formed around a crowd already gathering at the ruins. He noticed a small pile of plaster on the pavement ahead of him, and in the middle of it, he saw a bright red streak. As he got closer, he realized it was a human hand severed at the wrist. Aside from the bloody stump, the hand was so completely whitened that it looked like a plaster cast. He kicked it into the gutter and then turned down a side street to avoid the crowd. In 3 or 4 minutes, he was out of the area affected by the bomb, and the grimy, bustling life of the street continued as if nothing had happened. It was nearly 8 o'clock, and the bars where the proles hung out, known as pubs, were packed with customers. From their dirty swing doors, constantly opening and closing, came the smell of urine, sawdust, and sour beer. In the corner of a projecting house front, 3 men stood closely together, the middle one holding a folded newspaper, while the others leaned in to read over his shoulder. Even from a few paces away, Winston could see their bodies were tense and focused. It was clearly serious news they were examining. He was just a few steps away when the group suddenly broke apart, and 2 men started arguing violently. For a moment, they seemed ready to come to blows. "Can't you listen to what I say? No number ending in 7 has won in over 14 months. One shouted. "Yes, it has," the other insisted. "No, it hasn't. I've got them all written down at home. I take notes like clockwork, and I tell you, no number ending in 7. Yes, a 7 has won. I can almost tell you the number, 407 it ended in. It was in February, the 2nd week of February. February, your grandmother. I've got it all noted down in black and white. And I tell you no number." "Oh, give it a rest," said the 3rd man. They were arguing about the lottery. Winston looked back after covering 30 meters. They were still at it, their faces lively and passionate. The lottery, with its weekly payout of large prizes, was the one public event that captured the proles' serious attention. Many proles probably saw the lottery as the main, if not the only, reason to keep going. It was their joy, their folly, their escape, their mental boost. When it came to the lottery, even those who could barely read and write showed impressive skills in calculations and memory. There was even a whole group of men who made money simply by selling systems, predictions, and lucky charms. Winston had no role in the lottery, which was run by the Ministry of Plenty, but he knew, in fact, everyone in the party knew, that the prizes were mostly a fantasy. Only small amounts of money were actually paid out. The winners of the big prizes were non-existent people. In the absence of real communication between different parts of Oceania, it was not hard to arrange. If there was hope, it rested with the proles, and that was something to hold on to. When he spoke, it sounded reasonable, but looking at the people passing by on the sidewalk made it feel uncertain. The street he had entered sloped downhill. He sensed he had been in this neighborhood before, and that a main road was nearby. From somewhere ahead came a loud mix of shouting voices. The street turned sharply and ended at a set of steps leading down into a sunken alley. A few stall keepers sold worn-out vegetables there. At that moment, Winston recalled where he was. The alley opened up to the main street, and not 5 minutes away was the junk shop where he had bought the blank book that was now his diary. He had also purchased his pen holder and ink from a small stationer nearby. He paused at the top of the steps. Across the alley was a rundown pub. Its windows looked frosted but were just dusty. An old man, bent yet lively, with white mustaches sticking out like a prawn, pushed the swing door and entered. As Winston watched, it struck him that the old man, at least 80, had already been middle-aged when the revolution occurred. He and a few others like him were the last connections to the lost world of capitalism. In the party, few remained whose views had formed before the revolution. Most of the older generation had been wiped out during the major purges of the 50s and 60s, and those who survived had long been scared into complete silence. If anyone alive could give a true account of life in the early part of the century, it would be a prole. Suddenly, a passage from the history book he had copied into his diary came back to him, and a wild impulse took over. He decided to go into the pub, strike up a conversation with the old man, and ask him questions. He wanted to say, "Tell me about your life as a boy. What was it like back then? Was it better or worse than now?" He quickly descended the steps and crossed the narrow street. anxious that he might lose his nerve. It was madness, of course. There was no strict rule against talking to proles or visiting their pubs, but it was unusual enough to attract attention. If patrols showed up, he might pretend he felt faint, but they might not buy that. He pushed the door open. A strong smell of sour beer hit him instantly. When he entered, the chatter lowered to half its usual volume. He sensed everyone watching his blue overalls. A game of darts across the room paused for about 30 seconds. The old man he had followed stood at the bar, arguing with the barman, a stout young man with an enormous nose and big forearms. A group of others nearby watched the scene. "I asked you civil enough, didn't I?" the old man said, straightening his shoulders defiantly. "Are you telling me you don't have a pint mug in the whole bleeding boozer?" "And what in hell's name is a pint?" the barman replied, leaning forward with his fingers pressed on the counter. "Listen to him. Calls himself a barman and doesn't know what a pint is. A pint is half a quart, and there are 4 quarts in a gallon. I'd have to teach you the A, B, C next." "Never heard of them," the barman shot back. "Liter and half liter, that's all we serve. The glasses are on the shelf in front of you." "I like a pint," the old man persisted. "You could have drawn me off a pint easy enough. We didn't have these bleeding liters when I was young." "When you were young, we were all living in the treetops," the barman said, glancing at the other customers. Laughter erupted, and the tension from Winston's arrival faded. The old man's stubbled face turned pink. He turned away, grumbling to himself, and bumped into Winston. Winston gently caught him by the arm. "May I buy you a drink?" he asked. "You're a gent," the old man said, straightening up again. He seemed not to notice Winston's blue overalls. "Pint," he added firmly to the barman. "Pint of wallop." The barman poured 2 half-liters of dark brown beer into thick glasses he had rinsed in a bucket under the counter. Beer was the only drink available in prole pubs. Although proles were not supposed to drink gin, they could usually get it without trouble. The darts game resumed, and the group at the bar began discussing lottery tickets. For a moment, no one paid attention to Winston. He spotted a table by the window, where he and the old man could talk without being overheard. It was incredibly risky, but at least there was no telescreen in the room. He had checked that as soon as he came in. "He could have drawn me off a pint," the old man grumbled after settling down with his glass. "A half-liter isn't enough. It doesn't satisfy. A whole liter is too much. It makes me run to the bathroom, and don't get me started on the price." "You must have seen many changes since you were young," Winston said cautiously. The old man's pale blue eyes drifted from the dartboard to the bar, and then to the door marked "Gents," as if he expected to see the changes there. "The beer was better," he finally responded. "And cheaper. When I was young, mild beer, what we used to call wallop, was 4 pence a pint. That was before the war, of course." "Which war was that?" Winston asked. "It's all wars," the old man replied vaguely. He raised his glass, and his shoulders straightened again. "Here's wishing you the very best of health." He swallowed quickly, and the beer disappeared. Winston went to the bar and returned with 2 more half-liters. The old man seemed to forget his earlier complaints about a full liter. "You are much older than I am," Winston said. "You must have been an adult before I was born. You remember life in the old days, before the revolution. People my age don't know much about that time. We can only read about it in books, and what those books say might not be true. I'd like to hear your thoughts on that." "The history books say life before the revolution was completely different from now. There was terrible oppression, injustice, and poverty worse than we can imagine. Here in London, most people never had enough to eat from birth to death. Half of them didn't even have boots on their feet. They worked 12 hours a day, left school at 9, and slept 10 in a room. Meanwhile, there were only a few thousand rich people, the capitalists, who owned everything. They lived in beautiful houses with 30 servants, drove motor cars and horse-drawn carriages, drank champagne, and wore top hats." The old man suddenly brightened. "Top hats," he exclaimed. "Funny you should mention them. The same thought crossed my mind yesterday for no reason. I was just thinking how I haven't seen a top hat in years. They've all gone out of style. The last time I wore one was at my sister-in-law's funeral. And that was, I can't give you the exact date, but it must have been 50 years ago. Of course, it was only rented for the occasion, you understand. It's not really about the top hats, Winston said patiently. The important part is that these capitalists, along with a few lawyers and priests living off them, were the lords of the earth. Everything existed for their benefit. You, the ordinary people, the workers, were their slaves. They could do whatever they wanted with you. They could ship you off to Canada like cattle. They could sleep with your daughters if they chose. They could order you to be whipped with something called a cat-o' nine tails. You had to take your hat off when you passed them. Every capitalist had a group of servants who... The old man brightened again. Servants, he said. Now there's a word I haven't heard in a long time. That really takes me back. I remember, a long time ago, I sometimes went to Hyde Park on Sunday afternoons to hear the speakers. The Salvation Army, Roman Catholics, Jews, Indians, all sorts were there. And there was one man, well, I can't recall his name, but he was a powerful speaker. He really gave it to them. Servants, he said, servants of the bourgeoisie, flunkies of the ruling class. Parasites, that was another term he used. And hyenas, he definitely called them hyenas. Of course, he was referring to the Labour Party, you understand. Winston felt they were talking past each other. What I want to know is this, he said. Do you feel you have more freedom now than you did back then? Are you treated more like a human being? In the old days, the rich people, the people at the top, the House of Lords, the old man interjected, remembering. The House of Lords, if you like. What I'm asking is, could these people treat you as an inferior just because they were rich and you were poor? For example, did you have to call them sir and take off your hat when you passed them? The old man appeared to think deeply. He drank about a quarter of his beer before answering. Yes, he said. They liked it when you touched your hat to them. It showed respect, you see. I never agreed with it, but I did it often enough. Had to, you might say. And was it common? I'm only quoting what I've read in history books. Was it common for these people and their servants to push you off the pavement into the gutter? One of them pushed me once, the old man said. I remember it like yesterday. It was boat race night. People got really rowdy on boat race night, and I bumped into a young man on Shaftesbury Avenue. Quite a gent he was, dress shirt, top hat, black overcoat. He was zigzagging across the pavement, and I bumped into him accidentally. He says, "Why can't you look where you're going?" I said, "Do you think you've bought the pavement?" He says, "I'll twist your head off if you get fresh with me." I said, "You're drunk." "I'll have you arrested in half a minute," I said. And believe it or not, he put his hand on my chest and shoved me so hard, I nearly went under the wheels of a bus. Well, I was young back then, and I nearly went after him, but a sense of helplessness took hold of Winston. The old man's memory was a jumble of details. He could question him all day without getting any real information. The party histories might still have some truth, but perhaps they were completely true. He made one last attempt. "Maybe I haven't been clear," he said. "What I'm really trying to ask is this. You've been alive a long time. You lived half your life before the revolution. In 1925, for instance, you were already grown up. Would you say, from what you remember, that life in 1925 was better than it is now, or worse? If you had the choice, would you prefer to live then or now?" The old man looked thoughtfully at the dartboard. He finished his beer slowly. When he spoke, it was with a calm, philosophical tone, as if the beer had relaxed him. "I know what you expect me to say," he said. "You expect me to say I'd rather be young again. Most people would say they want to be young if you ask them. You have your health and strength when you are young. By the time you're my age, you're never well. My feet hurt and my bladder is terrible. I get up 6 or 7 times a night. On the other hand, being an old man has its perks. You don't worry as much. No dealings with women, and that's a relief. I haven't had a woman in nearly 30 years, if you can believe it. And I haven't wanted one either." Winston leaned back against the windowsill. There was no point in continuing. He was about to buy more beer when the old man suddenly got up and hurried to the filthy urinal at the side of the room. The extra half-liter was taking effect on him. Winston sat for a minute or two, staring at his empty glass, and hardly noticed when his feet led him out onto the street. In 20 years, he thought, the big question, Was life better before the revolution than it is now? Would no longer be answerable. But it was essentially unanswerable even now, since the few survivors from the past couldn't compare one era to another. They remembered countless trivial things. A fight with a coworker, searching for a lost bicycle pump, the face of a long-dead sister, the dust swirling on a windy morning 70 years ago. But all the important facts were beyond their comprehension. They were like an ant, capable of seeing small things but not big ones. And when memory faded and written records were distorted, the party's claim to have improved human life had to be accepted, because no standard existed to measure it against. At that moment his thoughts came to a halt. He stopped and looked up. He was in a narrow street with a few dark shops mixed among the houses. Above him hung 3 tarnished metal balls that looked like they had once been gold. He recognized the place. Of course, he was standing outside the junk shop where he had bought the diary. A wave of fear surged through him. It had been foolish to buy the book in the first place, and he had vowed never to come near the place again. Yet as soon as his thoughts wandered, his feet had brought him back here on their own. This was exactly the kind of impulsive act he had wanted to avoid by starting the diary. At the same time, he noticed that though it was nearly 9 o'clock, the shop was still open. Thinking it would be less noticeable to be inside rather than loitering on the pavement, he stepped through the door. If asked, he could say he was just looking for razor blades. The proprietor had just lit a hanging oil lamp that filled the air with a strange but welcoming smell. He was a man of about 60, thin and stooped, with a long, kind nose and gentle eyes distorted by thick glasses. His hair was almost white, but his eyebrows were bushy and still black. His glasses, gentle movements, and the worn black velvet jacket gave him a slightly intellectual vibe, as if he had once been a writer, or maybe a musician. His voice was soft and somewhat faded, with an accent less rough than most proles. "I recognized you on the pavement," he said right away. "You're the gentleman who bought the young lady's keepsake album. That was a lovely piece of paper, cream-laid, it used to be called. No paper like that has been made for, I'd guess 50 years. He peered at Winston over the top of his glasses. "Is there anything specific I can help you with? Or did you just want to look around?" "I was passing by," Winston replied vaguely. "I just looked in. I don't need anything in particular." "It's just as well," the proprietor said, "because I don't think I could satisfy you." He waved apologetically with his soft palm. "You see how it is, an empty shop you might say. Between you and me, the antique trade is about finished. There's no demand anymore, and no stock either. Furniture, china, glass, it's all been broken down over time. And most metal items have been melted down. I haven't seen a brass candlestick in years." The small shop was cramped, but it was nearly empty of anything valuable. The floor space was tight because dusty picture frames were stacked around the walls. In the window, there were trays of nuts and bolts, worn-out chisels, broken-bladed penknives, tarnished watches that didn't work, and other odds and ends. Only on a small table in the corner was there a mess of trinkets, lacquered snuff boxes, agate brooches, and the like, some of which seemed intriguing. As Winston moved toward the table, his eye caught a round, smooth object that glimmered softly in the lamplight. He picked it up. It was a heavy piece of glass, curved on one side and flat on the other, almost like a hemisphere. The glass had a soft quality, with a color and texture reminiscent of rainwater. In the center, magnified by the curved surface, was a strange pink, twisted object that looked like a rose or a sea anemone. "What is it?" Winston said, captivated. "That's coral," the old man replied. "It probably came from the Indian Ocean. They used to embed it in the glass. That wasn't made in less than 100 years. More, I'd say. It's a beautiful thing," Winston said. "It is a beautiful thing," the man said appreciatively, "but not many would say so today." He coughed. "Now if you wanted to buy it, that would cost you $4. I can remember when something like that would have sold for £8, and £8 was a lot of money. But who cares about real antiques these days, even the few that are left?" Winston quickly paid the $4 and tucked the prized item into his pocket. What drew him to it wasn't just its beauty, but its connection to a time that felt far removed from today. The soft rain-soaked glass was unlike any he had ever seen before. Its appeal increased because it seemed completely useless, although he suspected it was once meant to be a paperweight. It felt heavy in his pocket, but luckily it didn't create much of a bulge. It was a strange item, even a questionable one for a party member to possess. Anything old, particularly anything beautiful, was always somewhat suspect. The old man seemed noticeably cheerier after receiving the $4. Winston realized he would have taken 3 or even 2. "There's another room upstairs that you might want to check out," he said. "There's not much in it, just a few pieces. We'll need a light if we're going upstairs." He lit another lamp, and with a hunched back, slowly led the way up the steep, worn stairs and down a narrow corridor into a room that didn't face the street, but overlooked a cobbled yard filled with chimneys. Winston noticed that the furniture remained arranged as if the room was meant to be lived in. A strip of carpet lay on the floor, there were a couple of pictures hanging on the walls, and a shabby armchair sat close to the fireplace. An old glass clock with a 12-hour face ticked quietly on the mantelpiece. Under the window, taking up nearly a quarter of the room, was a large bed with the mattress still on it. "We lived here until my wife died," said the old man somewhat apologetically. "I'm selling the furniture bit by bit. That's a lovely mahogany bed, or it would be if you could get the bugs out of it. But I suppose you'd find it a bit cumbersome." He held the lamp high to light up the room, and in the warm, dim glow, the place looked surprisingly inviting. A thought crossed Winston's mind that it might be easy to rent the room for a few dollars a week, if he dared to take the risk. It was a wild idea and one he quickly discarded. Still, the room stirred in him a sense of nostalgia, a kind of ancestral memory. He felt he knew exactly what it would be like to sit here in an armchair beside an open fire, with his feet on the fender and a kettle on the stove, totally alone and totally safe, with no one watching him, no voice following him, with only the kettles singing and the clock's friendly ticking for company. "There's no telescreen," he couldn't help but whisper. "Ah," said the old man, "I never had one of those. Too expensive. And I never felt the need for it. Now, there's a nice gate-leg table in the corner. You'd have to put new hinges on it if you wanted to use the flaps, though." In another corner was a small bookcase, and Winston moved towards it. It held nothing but junk. The search for and destruction of books had been carried out just as thoroughly in the prole areas as anywhere else. It was unlikely that there was a copy of any book printed before 1960 anywhere in Oceania. The old man, still holding the lamp, stood in front of a picture hung in a rosewood frame on the wall, opposite the bed. "If you're interested in old prints," he started cautiously. Winston walked over to look at the picture. It was a steel engraving of an oval building with rectangular windows and a small tower in front. A railing surrounded the building, and at the back, there appeared to be a statue. Winston stared at it for a while. It seemed vaguely familiar, although he didn't remember the statue. "The frame's fixed to the wall," said the old man, "but I could unscrew it for you, I suppose." "I know that building," Winston finally said. "It's a ruin now, in the street outside the Palace of Justice." "That's right, outside the law courts. It was bombed many years ago. It used to be a church called St. Clement Danes." He smiled a bit sheepishly, as if aware he was saying something a bit silly, and added, "Oranges and lemons, say the bells of St. Clement's." "What's that?" asked Winston. "Oh, oranges and lemons, say the bells of St. Clement's. That was a rhyme we had when I was a kid. I don't remember how it goes, but I know it ended with, 'Here comes a candle to light you to bed. Here comes a chopper to chop off your head.' It was a sort of game. They stretched out their arms for you to pass under, and when they got to, 'Here comes a chopper to chop off your head,' they brought their arms down to catch you." It was just the names of churches. All the London churches were in it, all the main ones. Winston wondered which century the church might belong to. It was always hard to tell the age of a London building. Anything large and impressive, that looked relatively new, was automatically claimed to have been built after the Revolution, while anything clearly from an earlier period was said to date back to the Middle Ages. The centuries of capitalism were thought to have produced nothing valuable. You couldn't learn history from architecture any more than you could from books. Statues, inscriptions, memorial stones, street names, anything that could shed light on the past, had been deliberately changed. "I never knew it had been a church," he said. "There are still quite a few left, really," said the old man, "though they've been repurposed. Now how did that rhyme go? Ah, I've got it. Oranges and lemons, say the bells of St. Clement's. You owe me 3 farthings, say the bells of St. Martin's." That's as much as I can remember. A farthing was a small copper coin, kind of like a cent. "Where was St. Martin's?" asked Winston. "St. Martin's? That's still there. It's in Victory Square, next to the picture gallery. A building with a kind of triangular porch and columns in front, and a big flight of steps." Winston recognized the place well. "It's a museum used for propaganda displays, scale models of rocket bombs and floating fortresses, wax figures illustrating enemy atrocities, and the like. It used to be called St. Martin's in the Fields," the old man added, "although I don't remember any fields around there." Winston didn't buy the picture. It would have been an even stranger possession than the glass paperweight, and impossible to carry home unless he took it out of the frame. But he stayed for a few more minutes, talking to the old man, whose name he discovered was not Weeks, as one might expect from the sign above the shop, but Charrington. Mr. Charrington, it turned out, was a 63-year-old widower who'd run the shop for 30 years. He had thought about changing the name over the window for that whole time, but never got around to it. While they spoke, that half-remembered rhyme kept running through Winston's head. "Oranges and lemons, say the bells of St. Clement's. You owe me 3 farthings, say the bells of St. Martin's." It was odd, but when he said it to himself, he had the illusion of actually hearing bells, the bells of a lost London that still existed somewhere, hidden and forgotten. From one ghostly steeple to the next, he thought he heard them ringing out. Yet, as far as he could recall, he had never heard church bells in real life. He left Mr. Charrington and went down the stairs alone, so the old man wouldn't see him checking the street before stepping out the door. He had decided that after a suitable pause, maybe a month, he would take the chance of visiting the shop again. It wasn't likely to be more dangerous than avoiding an evening at the center. The real mistake had been returning here in the first place, after buying the diary, and not knowing if the shopkeeper could be trusted. However, yes, he thought again, he would come back. He would buy more bits of beautiful junk. He would get the engraving of St. Clement Danes, take it out of its frame, and sneak it home hidden under his jacket. He even briefly considered the crazy idea of renting the room upstairs again. For perhaps 5 seconds, excitement made him careless, and he stepped onto the pavement without even glancing through the window first. He had even started to hum a tune of his own making. "Oranges and lemons, say the bells of St. Clement's. You owe me 3 farthings, say the—" Suddenly, his heart seemed to freeze, and his stomach churned. A figure in blue overalls was approaching on the pavement, not 10 meters away. It was the girl from the fiction department, the one with dark hair. The light was fading, but he had no trouble recognizing her. She looked him directly in the face, then walked away quickly as if she hadn't seen him. For a few seconds, Winston was too shocked to move. Then he turned right and walked heavily away, not realizing at first that he was headed the wrong way. At least one question was answered. There was no doubt that the girl was spying on him. She must have followed him, because it was hard to believe it was a coincidence that she was walking in the same quiet back street that evening, far from where party members lived. It was too unlikely. Whether she was a genuine agent of the thought police or just a nosy amateur didn't matter much. What mattered was that she was watching him. She most likely saw him go into the pub too. It was hard to walk. The piece of glass in his pocket thudded against his thigh with each step, and he thought about taking it out and tossing it away. The worst part was the pain in his stomach. For a couple of minutes, he felt like he would die if he didn't find a bathroom soon. But there wouldn't be any public restrooms around here. Then the spasm passed, leaving a dull ache. The street was a dead end. Winston stopped and stood for several seconds, unsure of what to do, before turning around to retrace his steps. As he turned, he remembered that the girl had just passed him 3 minutes ago. He figured he could run and catch up with her. He could follow her until they were in a quiet spot, then hit her with a cobblestone. The glass in his pocket would be heavy enough to do the job. But he quickly dismissed the idea, because even the thought of physical effort felt unbearable. He couldn't run, he couldn't strike a blow, plus, she was young and would likely fight back. He also considered hurrying to the community center to stay there until it closed, as a way to create a partial alibi for the evening. But that was impossible too. A heavy tiredness had settled over him. All he wanted was to get home quickly, then sit down and be still. It was after 10 o'clock when he returned to the flat. The lights would go out at 11:30. He went into the kitchen and drank nearly a teacup of Victory gin. Then he sat down at the table in the alcove and took the diary out of the drawer. But he didn't open it right away. A loud female voice from the telescreen was blaring a patriotic song. He stared at the marbled cover of the book, trying unsuccessfully to block out the voice. It was at night that they came for you. It was always at night. The sensible thing was to kill yourself before they captured you. Some people definitely did that. Many disappearances were really suicides. But it took extreme bravery to end your life in a world where guns or quick, effective poison were impossible to find. He thought, with some surprise, about how pointless pain and fear were. His body betrayed him, freezing up just when action was required. He might have silenced the dark-haired girl if he had only acted quickly enough. But because of the intensity of his danger, he couldn't bring himself to act. He realized that during crises, one isn't just fighting an outside enemy. One is always battling against one's own body. Even now, despite the gin, the dull ache in his stomach made it hard to think clearly. He noticed this was true in all seemingly heroic or tragic situations. On the battlefield, in torture chambers, on sinking ships, the reasons you were fighting faded away as your body consumed your attention. Even when you weren't paralyzed by fear or screaming in pain, life became a daily struggle against hunger, cold or sleeplessness, against a sour stomach or a toothache. He opened the diary. It was important to write something down. The woman on the telescreen had started a new song, her voice irritating like jagged pieces of glass in his brain. He tried to think of O'Brien, to whom the diary was meant for, but instead, he began worrying about what would happen to him after the thought police captured him. It wouldn't matter if they killed him right away. Death was expected, but before that, nobody talked about it, yet everyone knew. There was the routine of confession, begging on the floor, screaming for mercy, the sound of broken bones, smashed teeth and bloody clumps of hair. Why did you have to go through that when the end was always the same? Why couldn't you just skip a few days or weeks of your life? No one ever escaped detection, and no one ever failed to confess. Once you committed thought crime, it was certain you would die by a certain date. Why then did that horrible reality, which changed nothing, have to linger in the future? He tried harder to picture O'Brien. "We shall meet in the place where there is no darkness," O'Brien had said. He thought he understood what that meant. The place where there is no darkness symbolized an imagined future, one he would never see, but which he could somehow share in through foreknowledge. But with the telescreen's nagging voice in his ears, he couldn't hold on to that thought. He lit a cigarette, but half the tobacco fell out onto his tongue, bitter and hard to spit out. The face of Big Brother replaced O'Brien's in his mind. Just like he had done a few days earlier, he took a coin from his pocket and examined it. The face looked up at him, heavy, calm, protective. But what kind of smile was hidden beneath the dark mustache? The words echoed back at him like a heavy toll. War is peace, freedom is slavery, ignorance is strength. If you like our recordings, consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel, so you don't miss any more audiobooks. And next part coming soon. Till then, take care, bye.